decoding stress, along with anxiety, and along with depression, and also insomnia. Insomnia was not in the original building, but insomnia goes with this whole process as long as belly fat. So it seems like an improbable title, but there is indeed a connection between all of these things on the screen. We're going to begin to explore that. Now I got to figure out how to advance this. My computer down here, so I'm looking up there the whole night. So we're going to start by decoding just kind of a few things we want to try and get accomplished. There are two common denominators, which we'll be exploring a little bit later in the program, that link all those things. Two primary issues that once you resolve those, these other things begin to kind of fall into line. And we'll enumerate a little bit more on what those common denominators are. The real key here is causative factors. Okay, causative factors, because what happens is that when a patient comes to us, we're looking for cause, and everything's very individualized. So we're going to talk about a number of different things that can be happening, what works for you, maybe different what works for you, what's different for you, because there's no one size fits all. So what happens when you go to most medical practitioners, and not to denigrate what they do because they're trained a certain way, if you've got a problem with stomach ulcers, or you need a situation for you get too much acid, what do you get?
Antacids.
Yeah, an antacid of some sort, or a proton pump inhibitor. So but everybody gets the same thing. They either get Protonix, or they get Reprisol, or they get something along those lines. There's no one size fits all, so everything is going to be different. And what I want to also have you understand that these conditions really are symptoms that are physiological imbalances. They are not diseases. Because what you've been led to believe sometimes, if you have anxiety, you've got a disease. In fact, the next point that I make is that all of these things, many of them are actually classified as mental illness. And I want to let you know that something that could be further from the truth. It is not an illness. These are symptoms, just like if you have high blood pressure. That's the condition, all right. There's also a symptom of something else wrong in your body. So a lot of times we'll get these things that have labels like anxiety, depression. They're just signs and symptoms of an imbalance that has a cause or has causes that are contributing to it. And the current treatments that we'll explore briefly in the first part of our lecture really are geared toward doing what? Managing your symptoms, controlling the symptoms. They're not directed at actually fixing or getting to the cause and correcting the cause of what's there. In fact, you'll see one of the themes, and again, this is not to beat up on any of your physicians. Your physicians are hardworking. If someone were to say, where's the problem in the medical system, where would you think it is? Where's the problem?
Teaching.
Education, but it's a little bit deeper than that. Research, but who controls research?
Pharmaceutical.
Thank you, pharmaceutical companies. The problem is that we have a big profit motivation here because they're very content to allow you to continue taking your pills for how long? Because it's good for their bottom line. So the thing is that your doctors are trained, yes, a certain way. There's standards of care that are established a certain way. All those standards of care and research are really dictated by the money that flows from the pharmaceutical companies into the coffers of the universities to get that done. How many people like the Big Bang Theory? That's paid for by pharmaceutical companies. Now, not the show itself, but it's a sponsor. If you notice that all the ads are on TV, that's the grip they also have, because if they don't like something that's going on editorial-wise or whatever, guess what they threaten to do? Pull their advertising dollars. So they begin to have lots of different directions. So stress. We're going to start off with stress as one of the overall conditions. And one of the definitions of stress here is that it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So you get tense because something's going on in your life. Anybody have stress? Raise your hand, please. Okay, those who did not raise your hand, or talk to you later about it. Now, the medical definition is a little bit different. It says in a medical or biological context, stress is physical, mental, or emotional factor that causes bodily tension. Well, it's kind of the same thing, but leastwise it's true. And a very important thing is they talked about that it's physical. It's not just mental, emotional. And I will let you know, and I will contend, and I will also outline for you today to realize that most of it is physiological. That is not, and yes, it does manifest itself in you feeling emotionally certain ways and perhaps acting certain ways, but indeed it is physiological. They say that stress can be external. Now, I thought this was interesting by definition. Notice what they define as external. Anybody see anything odd with that? They said external is environmental, psychological, or social situations.
Psychological.
Psychological, is that external?
No.
Yes, somehow it's like beyond your control. And I will let you know that nothing can be further from the truth. It is within your control in many, many different ways. And then it also talks about if it gets bad enough that your stress can initiate the fight or flight syndrome, and they describe this as a complex set of neurological and endocrinological kind of reactions. And they use the word complex because they want it to appear what? To be difficult, to really, so if it's complex, can you guys do it?
No.
No, it's beyond your capability and control, so it's way too complex for the mere mortal to understand what's going on. So what are some of the health effects? There's a survey done that most Americans feel some level of stress. How could they not? How many people watch the news? How many people wish they didn't watch the news? So what happened? All you have to do is turn on there, get the Paris thing, and we got, I won't get into political affiliations. I did forget to change something on this slide. I don't want to offend people later on, maybe we'll see. I usually talk about those things. What happens is that, anyway, 44% of people said that their stress has increased more in the last 5 years. How many people would agree with that? And for different reasons. 2008, obviously when the market hit, that changed a lot of economic type situations. And of course, all the unrest we got across over there, and all Congress can't get anything done because they're all fighting with each other and everything else. So you can have high blood pressure, you can have head and neck tension, that's some muscles. It can transfer into digestion and IBS type issues. It can affect your metabolism, your insulin, and in terms of your ability to be able to handle sugar issues. And those also says mental. Stress can cause mental issues. And now here's some of our topics: anxiety, depression, insomnia, and even memory. So stress is actually kind of the root. And we're going to come back to stress at the very tail end and talk about positive aspects of stress. But notice that stress is a general term. Can we measure stress? Not very easily. Stress is one of these ambiguous things because it's enwrapped in all these other kinds of symptoms that we begin to have. And so when I start talking about stress, I'll say what's missing from the equation. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot of. What's missing from the equation, and I'll answer this, and this will come up many times.
The causative reasons for all
The
that.
cause, exactly right.
Yeah.
What's missing is causality. What is the basis and root of the overall stress? Because again, our stress factors may be individualized, and how we react to that and the different physiological reasons for that stress is also quite variable. Anxiety. So as a separate entity, we want to explore and talk about what's anxiety. It's first of all the most common mental illness, as they refer to it as. I'm not really buying onto that. We'll play along with that. But if somebody keep track of this one, we got 40 million people here. We're going to go through these things. So somebody do a little addition for me as we go along. So we got 40 million people have anxiety. And really, it's the largest thing affecting the whole population in terms of these kinds of categories. And you can see the percentages up there, people who are involved. And it is costing the body, the American public, some $42 million, which is about 1/3 of what they view as the $148 billion mental health bill in terms of what's there. So anxiety makes up a big portion. Let's take a look at why. It also talks here that also has a lot to do with overall cost, because when people are anxious, are they worried?
Yes.
Are they nervous about what could be wrong?
Yes.
So as a result, those individuals many times are because they still don't have answers to why they're feeling anxious and worried, and they start worrying about everything. Every symptom they have becomes a bigger issue, and they're running off to the doctor to try and get answers about what's going on. So there's a lot of uncertainty that's created with anxiety, and so they put a big burden on the overall. And I say they, there may be individuals here having physiological anxiety, but I want you to, and we're going to be decoding and have you understand exactly what the root of it is, and as we go through the process. But what I put up here is, here's different kinds of anxiety. The anxiety is, you don't just have generic anxiety. You got yourself, if you want to have general anxiety disorder, I guess that's like run the middle. Or we can have panic disorder, we can have social anxiety disorder if you're nervous about being here in public. Or you can have all kinds of phobias like spiders or heights or whatever those kinds of things are. Also obsessive compulsive disorders, and even PTSD. Now, what impresses you about that? They have all these labels.
No problem.
No cause.
Solutions.
And what these all are, also, this adds a complexity. What makes the difference between somebody who's got social anxiety and who's got general anxiety? Is it a big difference, or is it this fine line? But yet, if they put different labels on it, they make it more sophisticated, they make it more complex as an overall subject, what happens? People don't confront it. People don't look at it because it seems too overwhelming. And there's obviously valid things. Soldiers coming back from war is horrific. Is there going to be anxiety? Of course there is. people who have been in first responders many times, and something like 9/11, can that cause post-traumatic stress? There's no doubt the circumstances can begin to add to that. But then realize what I want to also let you know is that, again, it's a physiological manifestation, not just mental. It also said that sometimes anxiety occurs with all these other things. So you take a look at the list. We've got different kinds of bipolar, we've got fibromyalgia, we've got IBS, we've got, and again, now it's got stress in terms of this overall situation. So when you talk about anxiety, again, it all kind of blurs together. We talk about stress, it kind of blurs with anxiety, because stress can also cause gastrointestinal issues as well. So all of these things that we have begin to blur, because what is missing from the equation is what's causing the anxiety. And then from anxiety, we're going to go into depression. Now you hear a lot more about depression, and it affects approximately 14.8 million. So we had what, how many million we had a minute ago, 40 million? So now we're up to
54,
more or less 54, 50, we'll say 55 million. So I keep track of that. So it's affecting supposedly about 6.7% of the overall population. I suspect it's higher than that. I'm not sure, I remember the data that I got this source, but I forget what data it was, but it's probably higher than that because the amount of antidepressant use is out the roof. It's the leading cause of disability in the United States for people aged 15 through 44. Number one cause. It's not getting thorough work. It's not some kind of accident or physical disability. It's actually depression. People cannot function enough to be able to get things done. It's more prevalent in women than men. And for the most part, it's because you gals are smarter than us. Because we don't complain about stuff. And I say that because what happens if you have something you're not feeling good, you will go in and get it checked out. What do your husbands say, ladies?
No.
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, I'm okay. And then when the wheels fall off the bus, then we're not okay. And so that's probably what we're running into. So women have it. So I'm not sure they have it more prevalently. It's just they're more willing to acknowledge that they might be down. Guys will not admit they're depressed. They will not admit they're anxious because our social culture says that's not okay. We're supposed to be tough guys, and so therefore we ignore those things. It's estimated 23% of women in the population before they take an antidepressant, and that's, to me, we have more or less about 300 some odd million people. So if it's 23% of women, that seems to be higher than just 6.7% of the population. And the federal government says that 1 in 10 Americans take some antidepressants. 10%. And it's increased almost 400% between the 4 years between the time frame between 1988 to 1994, and then the same more or less 3-year period, it's increased 400%. So that means it's working, isn't it? So antidepressants, first of all, what do antidepressants do? Do they make more neurotransmitters, which we'll talk about briefly? No, they fool about it. They don't make more neurotransmitters. What they basically do, this is an area of a nerve, I forget the pointer, but there's a nerve coming down. You see those little, like a little lightning bolt there. It's stimulating those vesicles to release a neurotransmitter in the gap between the synapses. And what happens is those little neurotransmitters fill in those receptor sites, like the little parking places. And that's how it's supposed to work. And then the neurotransmitters recycled back very efficiently. The next picture shows it a little bit better. And you can see that these nerve impulses, how your brain works, how your nervous system works, and how you feel emotionally, to some degree, is depicted by the balance of these neurotransmitters. So what happens with these medications is that normally there's a recycling, as you see on the picture to your left. It goes back in, and the medications block the reuptake. They block the ability of the body to reabsorb those neurotransmitters, so they stay out there longer. So they work overtime. What happens when you work overtime?
Exhaustion.
You get tired, you get exhausted. So over time, the longer someone's on one of these SSRIs and one of these other medications to help them feel better emotionally, then what happens is that their neurotransmitters get tired too. They stop working. And then you see ads on television which say, when your antidepressant alone is not enough, here's some more crap to take. and so you see it and it just kind of begins to snowball because it doesn't fix anything. Now, most antidepressants, if you look on there, they're designed to be used for a period of time. Anybody I know how long they're supposed to be used?
3 months.
3 to 6 months. You know how many most people are on them? Years. Who's happy about that? So what happens is, and so what they're doing is, so can people have imbalances in serotonin? Absolutely, we're going to talk about that. But is it a situation where they're really fixing anything, or just taking what's already broke and making it a little bit more broke?
Can I just get a quick question?
Of course.
When it comes to, I think it was the slide, when the drug is used, the antidepressant,
Yeah.
what does it do? It blocks
The reuptake.
the reuptake.
Yeah, in fact, medications do one of 3 things, and this is not, so thanks for the question. And I will field a lot more questions at the end, but that's a good question now, because it does one of 3 things, actually. It either blocks the recycling of the neurotransmitter so that it doesn't go back into the nerve to be reused again, or it takes those receptor sites and either increases their ability to respond or decreases that receptor site to receive it. That's all the drugs do. They either increase the responsive of those little parking places you see on the bottom end, or they decrease it, or they block the reuptake. That's all they do. They don't make more, they don't balance anything. Can they help a person feel better? Maybe. I'm not a big fan of it, can you tell? So sometimes it helps. So again, the same question, when we look at this, it's what's missing from the equation. It's causality. And we're going to get into the causality. We're going to be talking about and getting into what causes anxiety, what causes depression, and what are the things that can be done naturally to actually bring it back into balance. So we'll be talking about causality as we develop this. Now we're to insomnia. This is a big one. 70 million people have insomnia. What does that bring us up to? 125 million. So 125 million. Now we're getting to maybe a third of the population so far has got one of these things going on. So it's a lot of people. And the number of people with sleep apnea is about 18 million. So now we're up to 140 million. Sleep apnea, for those who are not familiar with this, means that during the night you stop breathing for a period of time. And of course, if there's less oxygen when you're in that situation, there is a lot of information that suggests that you might then have heart issues or brain issues, or you may not sleep restless. I've yet to have a person go for a sleep study who didn't end up with a sleep apnea issue. and now I got to change that because I had one. Okay, so I had one guy who went, but everyone else who's ever gone has got a sleep apnea machine. And so therefore you probably should still get in that business because everybody's still getting them. So there's a lot of people out there with that. So the verdict is out because I've had people who I fixed their allergies and their sleep apnea went away. People who I've helped lose weight and the sleep apnea goes away. So see, sleep apnea, is it a condition or is it a reflection of something else that's not balanced in the body? You see? Now, for some people, I will say this though, some people say, boy, I got to sleep and I sleep better. So if you've gotten it and it works for you, for now, then keep using it. There's nothing wrong with oxygen. Breathing is a good idea. Keep that going. There's also another grouping here now called restless leg. And they group this into an insomnia because they don't have any other time, but they lay down and they got to move the leg. They got to move the leg. And so this phrase, so therefore they can't get to sleep, and it adds to the overall sleep issue. How many are we up to now? 190? 190 million? So, is that right?
I got 164.
Good, 164, all right. Good, I'm an auctioneer now. But nonetheless, it's a lot of people. The estimated cost to employers is actually about 18 billion. Because why? People are tired, they miss work, they can't get there. They're not actually working very efficiently because they're exhausted. They're not sleeping. Sleep medication. Andy, and how many people like when we mess with commercials? I like that butterfly. There's a new one. You ever see the one with the cat? You got the black cat and you got the white cat, and then the other one's fuzzy and the other one creeps you away. So they got all kinds of fun things. But nonetheless, $32 billion for those sleep aids. How long do you take them? Forever. Andy is a tough little drug to get people off of. It's very addictive. And for certain individuals, it actually causes psychotic breaks in those individuals. So it can be a very dangerous drug. So what's missing from the equation? It's what's causing a person not to be able to sleep. Those questions aren't asked, but here's the solution. That's what we have rampant in our society. Belly fat. Listen, how many people came here who don't hear about belly fat? So, first of all, excess weights reach epidemic proportions, everybody knows that. We're gonna talk very specifically about the belly fat portion of this. But everybody knows we've got this epidemic going on. And there's about 1 million adults that are overweight in 2003. That's across the world, by the way, not just the United States. By 2013, it's actually doubled in 10 years. Obesity is not just a U.S. issue, it is a worldwide issue. And all the other things that tend to go with the obesity is also part of the problem. So being overweight is not it. And this increase is really across all ages. How many people are hearing about our kids, our teenagers who are becoming obese as well? So the weight issue is one that is beginning to literally weight everyone down. The effects of excess weight, most people know these things, I'm not going to belabor them, because these are things, diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, sleep apnea is up there. So again, see how these things all weave together. Because if you're overweight, a lot of times you won't be able to sleep very well. Cancer, stroke, those are all risk things that you should know about. There's about, as a result of the weight issues, there's about 112,000 deaths annually that are attributed directly to weight. And the cost of obesity is estimated about 117 billion. It's not really, when you hear right into it, it's looking at weight will probably, that and everything else that goes with that, will probably bankrupt our healthcare system in about 10 years. And the increase of obesity is about 30%, 6% increase in terms of overall medical costs that goes with that. And of course, the question is what's missing in the equation, what's causing the weight. So when we start decoding this puzzle, so what I want you to get is these are big problems. It affects really hundreds of millions of people. And so the question it has is medication the answer? Because if it was, the problem would keep getting bigger. You will have had solutions to what's there, so the ranks just keep getting bigger and bigger. And on top of that, so that's that point. The other thing is it's also addictive. This was I found this a fascinating. I really didn't notice myself. 5%. We have 5% of the population, but we consume over half of the pharmaceutical drugs in the planet. Now, maybe we have 2 different drugs, or something along those lines. But we are an over-medicated society. We are a drug society because we tend to think if we have an ill. So let me give you an example. This goes back to the 1950s. So those of you who have gray hair like me will know this. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to sing you a little jingle. I'm going to say, pop, pop, fizz, fizz. See? It's in there. You can't get it out. What is it? Alka-Seltzer. They still make Alka-Seltzer?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. But I think I saw the little jingle guy, the little guy jumping around. So, yeah, but we have these things have been incorporated for, if you have a bad headache, you don't just have a bad headache. What kind of headache do you have? What kinds of Excedrin headache. See, they want to be able to identify, so they get this, so the symptom relief type orientation, where anytime you have a symptom, there's a drug for it. Symptom relief orientation. And sometimes what happens, we as a population have helped create the situation. When you have a symptom, how quickly do you want relief? I make this joke sometimes. I said, some of my patients would probably like to drop their bodies off in the morning and pick up the 5 if they could. Like you do your car. And so because that way it'd be quick and easy. Sometimes getting healthy is not quick or easy. But I tell you what's really not quick and easy, and that's being sick. Americans consume 80% of the painkillers in the world. 80%. Now, what that'll be Tylenol, that'll be ibuprofen, but it's also Oxycontin and all the other kind of stuff. The physicians write 259 million prescriptions a year for painkillers. And 70% of all Americans are on at least one thing. So we are a drug society, and who's happy about that? Most of the time not us, by the way, because we're still taking those pills, we're still spending money, and to a large degree, are we really improving our health? Are we really doing what we want to do? It's estimated that drugs kill about 200,000 people a year. And by the way, that's not illegal drugs. These are normal prescription drugs taken exactly like they were supposed to be taken. Not overdoses, but because of the effects, sometimes people have adverse reactions. So 200,000 people. And what's missing from the equation? So everything that's currently in our system is geared toward symptom relief orientation. Is geared toward not the cause, but what's happening. So let's decode the puzzle. The first big key that begins to tie all this together, and it's at the top of the list because it plays a major role, is cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Everybody knows what stress does, and cortisol is the agent of stress. And I say the agent of stress because it is produced by your adrenal gland. And it's produced by your adrenal gland in response to stress. But what stress is for you versus stress for somebody else is altogether different. So cortisol has a lot of different effects as far as the body is concerned. And we're going to see how this begins to weave in and what you can begin to do about it. Cortisol, it's called the fight or flight. Because Hans Selye, who's a physiologist who did a lot of the work, is that if this cortisol is upregulated, you're either going to stand your ground and fight or you're going to run. In any event, if you're doing either one of those, are you calm? Are you collected? Are you, maybe if you're going to fight, are you a little angry? Are you a little irritable? Start getting an idea, because that's what happens. And are you a little bit worried the bear might get you after all? See, when you get the fight or flight thing going, those are the emotions that come with the hormone. You're emotionally are responding, your cortisol is not responding, then your emotions follow because the hormone is driving those thoughts and those worries and fears. So a lot of times when people have those anxieties and stresses that go with it, it's because cortisols are not working. They feel the anxiety, fear, irritability. That's two sides of this. And then we'll be tying it together with all the other symptoms here momentarily. It's also a wakeful hormone. So it's designed in the morning when you wake up. Cortisol is what greets your day. As the day goes along, it comes down at noon, comes down at evening, comes down at bedtime. Or at least that's what it's supposed to do. So it has this nice little diurnal rhythm. And you might be able to get an idea if cortisol's not working good, what happens to that rhythm. You start losing it. And so if you just buzz along all the time, it begins to not work well with how the things are supposed to work with that cycle. It breaks your body down, and it is catabolic. Catabolic means it breaks your body down. So, for example, how many people here skip a meal during the day? A few people did that. So what happens is, and what happens when people want to lose weight, they say, wow, I just won't eat. I had an interview this morning, and she said, I took some protein pills. I said, I'm good. So you might as well take a bite of your arm. Because when you don't eat, your body will still get the calories it needs. If you're not putting it in your mouth, it will say, okay, I'm going to raise the blood sugar. So how does your body raise the blood sugar when you're not eating? Cortisol. Cortisol goes in, and it'd be nice if it grabbed the fat that's here, right? It doesn't. It grabs your muscle. It grabs protein from your connective tissue. It grabs protein from the line of your bowels or your sinuses. It begins to go to those high protein stores, and it takes that protein to the liver, where it's converted to glucose. And the next thing you know, body says, oh, here you go, blood sugar's fine. But you've just broken down your tissues in the process. It's catabolic. And what it does with that process is it tends to it makes blood fat. So, I mean, obviously there's lots of other fat, but cortisol is one of the major barriers to weight loss. It's number 2 on my list, and when people come to see me for weight loss, it's number 2. Insulin's number 1, by the way. Because cortisol, it not only mobilizes the proteins, but also mobilizes the fats out of the fat cells. But what happens is the body doesn't need it right then, contrary to what cortisol thinks is going on. And so those triglycerides, those fats that have been mobilized, are carried back, and they're actually deposited in other areas. And because the insulin receptors are increased around the belly, we get belly fat when we have cortisol. So the cortisol will tend to cause the belly fat that is part of the overall situation. Higher levels of belly fat are very much associated with things like increased risk of diabetes, increased risk of high blood pressure, what's called metabolic syndrome. That's belly fat, and cortisol plays a major role in what's going on. It also reduces the immune system's response, because cortisol, high levels of cortisol, or dysfunctional cortisol, atrophies your lymph. And your lymph is where your white blood cells mature that help fight viruses and those things. It also attacks the lining of your gastrointestinal system. And there's a thing called secretory IgA. That's an immunoglobulin. That's immune for sinuses, your bladder, your lungs. And so what happens is the adrenal cortisol will actually diminish those levels of immunoglobulin, and it leaves those tissues susceptible to any invading organism that might be passing through. So cortisol is number one. Second key component. And it's really these two key components that undercuts every one of these conditions. Is the digestive system. The digestive system, and many people here already know this, that it has 80% of your immune system is in the gut. It's called the gut-associated lymphatic tissue. When your gut integrity is compromised, your immune system is compromised. And when your immune system is compromised, a lot of things are. But also, what's beginning to finally emerge is this. It's a book out. I'm glad it's here because I've been preaching it for the last 30 years. It's called The Second Brain. Every single brain chemical you have in your brain is in your gut in equal, if not larger, amounts. Every neurochemical in your brain that makes you think and feel and react is in your gut in the same or more that exists there. And so therefore, those brain chemicals that make us think and feel certain ways and express ourselves certain emotions are impacted by what goes wrong as far as the gut is concerned. And these are the ones we're going to touch a little bit on, and we'll talk about each one of these. But the main chemicals that we're looking at, I call them chemicals, they're really just neurohormones. These are things in your brain or your nervous system that work just like neurohormones, just like hormones do. They actually control the overall function. So serotonin, GABA, dopamine, and melatonin. Now, so how many people recognize melatonin? Everybody knows that one, yeah. So that was about sleep. And the other ones really affect mood in different ways. And we're going to explore all this in the relationship now as we move forward. Like those arrows? This fell in. So here's cortisol, kind of leads the way. And it causes anxiety. It causes irritability. It causes you to kind of feel like you're racing all the time. And if it's also a situation where it's off, then it begins to impact on the next major key. By the way, phosphatidylserine is what you can use. And by the way, I'm going to tell you these supplements that I will sometimes test. But I test every one of these to make sure they work on you. By the way, I don't know who in this room has a cortisol issue. Not everyone sitting here necessarily does. There are ways for us to evaluate that, which we will talk about. But phosphatidylserine, yeah.
Probably hate to ask this question, but it seems to me it's the other way around.
What's that?
The cortisol is responding to the anxiety or emotional anxiety that the person has.
It's not been
I
my-
don't see how it's the causative factor.
Yeah, and that's a good question. That's not been what I've observed. Or at least that's not where I have to intervene. Because cortisol is so amped up in most individuals that unless I address that, we're never going to get to any other part of that.
Well, that
So it
makes
may be
sense.
indeed true, because when a person, let's say you've got a bad gut, are you anxious about that? And that's part of the point here, is there's an interrelationship that goes every which way here. Just go continue to develop, and I'll be glad to respond to that at the end if I don't get to it for you.
Okay, thank you.
But indeed, cortisol is being a stress hormone because it does so much to break the body down. And you are correct, it will respond to a lot of other kinds of feelings that people have or situations that they have. But by far and away, the largest and the last thing to get better in many cases is the cortisol. It's the place we have to intervene, but it's also the most difficult because of what we're talking about, where it comes from.
Doctor?
Yeah,
As I just give an example, you see a bear suddenly in the forest.
yeah,
My cortisol level, I was looking at nature and feeling quite calm.
yeah.
And now I have to fight or flight.
Sure, sure.
So the cortisol is responding to a mental state
Yeah.
primarily, or emotional
And
state.
it certainly can, and when we're intervening and when we're trying to work with this is where it comes into place.
Then I understand. Yeah.
Cortisol, when it is, regardless of whatever process is giving rise to that, will begin to affect the gut lining. Now, leaky gut, and then many of you have attended a leaky gut lecture I've given here, leaky gut is where you begin to have the immune system broken down so much in the gut that you start developing food allergies, and you have a whole host of things occurring that directly impact on that. But what you also have is every single one of these neurotransmitters, every single one of these neurohormones are impacted also by what's going on. One of which is melatonin. And melatonin, as everybody knows, actually is for sleep, and it can cause insomnia. Now what happens is that melatonin, there are melatonin receptors on the adrenal gland itself, and melatonin is impacted by cortisol. melatonin is suppressed by cortisol. And you can actually use melatonin to begin to balance out cortisol. And so a lot of times, and there's newer things are being done by a colleague of mine down in Texas, where he's actually giving people melatonin about 1 milligram per hour from about 3 o'clock to bedtime. People aren't falling asleep because it helps modulate the cortisol. Cortisol is difficult to get down because even if you change your mindset and even if the bear goes away, your cortisol is still high for a while. Well, unfortunately, people are facing bears every day, where they think they are. Therein lies the issue. Yeah.
Are these people eating the melatonin? Does it get absorbed through the stomach?
Well, you say absorbed. Yes, it does get past absorbed. Now, people say it doesn't go across the blood-brain barrier. The answer is no. It's the peripheral melatonin that when you take melatonin at night, you get a little drowsy. It's because it's buffering cortisol. That's the effect that we're finding that it has. It doesn't increase your melatonin in your brain. The blood-brain barrier doesn't let it cross. It buffers cortisol.
So eating it works?
Yes, it works. Now, is it the one thing that's going to work? Of course not. If all I had to do is give people melatonin, that'd be easier. If I give only phosphatidylserine, that'd be easy. It's not always just that easy, but I want you to understand the dynamics here. So most of the time when people come and say, I can't fall asleep and I can't stay asleep, there's a cortisol component to that. And the component is tied up in the fact that yes, it keeps your nervous system excitable, but it also is negatively affecting the melatonin, which normally helps us get into a sleeping state.
Does eating the melatonin reduce your cortisol?
Yes, it does. And that's exactly the point. So and this guy, he's done work with a lot of professional athletes. These guys are really amped up, and sometimes they'll measure his cortisols, and they're totally off the roof. He's giving them as much as 40 milligrams of melatonin a day. 40 milligrams. I mean, I don't prescribe that much, but 40 milligrams, and that's the only way that he's able to get the cortisol under control. And there may be other things these guys are doing as part of it. So I don't recommend that much. And I've only just recently, over the last couple of months, started actually delivering and giving this melatonin as part of my cortisol if I can't get to respond with phosphatidylserine or ashwagandha or some of the other things that can begin to help modulate the cortisol while we're fixing these other things. See, I don't want to just give you a pill to make your cortisol better too. I want to get the whole situation working better and take the stresses off the body. GABA is another neurotransmitter. And it's kind of, it's when it's off, when it's low, when it's affected by this leaky gut issue, it also causes anxiety. And it adds to the situation. And there are a lot of different things that can help GABA. And I just mentioned one here, which is taurine. Taurine is an amino acid. Taurine is used to help facilitate GABA's action in the body. So you can take a simple amino acid like taurine, and sometimes that'll help you feel less anxious and feel less agitated as well. And but anyway, any of these things we're talking about, the phosphatidylserine or the melatonin or the taurine, is infinitely better than the silly meds that are out there that are doing nothing to begin to pull down your body and to have adverse effects.
Is that the ingredient they put in these energy drinks?
Some, I think I saw one, and I just recently looked at 5-Hour Energy drink, and it has taurine in it. Because what they want is, because part of what you give you energy, also you want an even energy, you don't want to be agitated. The 5-Hour Energy, I was actually surprised. I thought it was just crap. It's probably synthetic, but it's still not as bad as some of those other ones. It has some caffeine. It doesn't have a lot of artificial sweeteners and sugars, and I was a little surprised by it. I don't advocate you going to get it, but it's not bad. Serotonin, that's probably one of the larger ones. Serotonin is referred to sometimes as your feel-good, happy neurotransmitter. Because when serotonin levels drop down, people can be down. But the other thing, and I see this a lot more than depression, I don't even like those terms, but I have to use it because it communicates, is overwhelm. When serotonin is impacted, again, most of the time these people who have gut issues, then they're overwhelmed. Things that normally wouldn't bother them at all of a sudden feels like it's a mountain. Mm-hmm. It feels like it's too much. And so when you have that, no, we're going to talk about, again, time this all back, but if you feel overwhelmed as well as being down, it begins to not make for a good day. And L-tryptophan, the only single thing, there's only one thing in the whole plant that makes more serotonin, and that's a protein called tryptophan. That's it, nothing else. Your body can't take anything else. It can't take Zoloft or Lexapro or any of that nonsense, because those make it work overtime. Your body needs this protein. Now this protein, by the way, can also go into niacin. So sometimes I'll give people 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is the next step closer to serotonin, because then you can start filling the swimming pool up. And I use the analogy a lot of times, so if your swimming pool is empty of serotonin, it's difficult to get back on top of the game. It's one thing to talk about, hey, think better. Almost.
Is that what they took off the market for a
Yeah.
while?
Yeah, what are they taking off the market?
Because it wasn't regulated by pharmaceutical.
They made it wrong.
Yeah, I'll tell you, at the end, I will answer a few things and I'll explain why they took off the market. Dopamine. Dopamine is kind of a reward neurotransmitter. When people drink or do drugs, they do it because the dopamine goes up. So it's kind of your joy. Or if it's low, you're going, eh. You can look at a tree and say, yeah, it's pretty. Or you can go, wow, it's beautiful. So it's your joy and your appreciation of life. Dopamine will filter that. And by the way, the analogy I try and give you a lot of times is that how many women, when they were having their period, they got a little PMSy? Raise your hand. They got PMSy. And the reality, so hormones shift moods. Whether we like it or not, hormones have an impact on how we think and how we feel. And neurotransmitters do the same thing. So they have that overall. Is also, dopamine affects how quick you think. If dopamine drops down, also we don't have a good recall. I didn't mention cortisol earlier, also messes up your memory. It affects hippocampus. It's really between your short-term and long-term memory.
What do you take for that?
Cure.
L-tyrosine. L-tyrosine is an amino acid, another protein. Now, your thyroid uses it, your adrenal uses it, a lot of competition for tyrosine, but tyrosine is the only thing your body can use to make more dopamine. So I'm going to hold questions to the end because she's giving me the high sign I'm talking too much. Never happened before. And I have the green arrow at the bottom because I want you to understand that everything's tied together. If you're overwhelmed, you're going to feel anxious. This is kind of your point. If you're down, or if you're not, you don't care, it's hard to get excited about life. And you're going to maybe feel anxious or irritable. And a lot of times these go together. If you got serotonin and cortisol, you're both anxiously down, or you're irritated. So these things go together, and they all impact each other. Just like I mentioned, cortisol affects melatonin and vice versa. The same is true of every single one of these going back and forth. The real key, and how am I doing? What do I need to do? 5 minutes? Okay. There's the feet. So I think that this slide hopefully gave you an idea. There's an interrelationship here, and fixing the gut is central. If you don't fix the gut, you will not fix the neurotransmitters. If you don't fix the neurotransmitters, you can't take enough stress off the individual so that their cortisol can take a deep breath. And so maybe it's not a question of what came first, is the chicken or the egg. We got to take both sides of the equation. And so balancing out the gut, balancing out what's going on with every neurotransmitter and what's going on with cortisol is an important part. The evaluation we do is we refer to as a functional evaluation, because what it is we're looking at the function of the body. There are laboratory tests that we can do to look at measuring cortisol. It's a saliva test, easy to do. It measures it morning, noon, evening, in bed, see how it's doing. That's the quantitative data. We're going to talk in a minute about how is it functioning. You can do a digestive stool analysis to see, do we have a lot of inflammation, see what's happening. We can check for food sensitivities, which are a byproduct of leaky gut many times, and then you eat foods and that adds to the inflammation as well. And you can measure neurotransmitters. Me and my psychiatrist friends are very surprised sometimes when they say, well, you can't measure neurotransmitters. I say, yes, you can. It's a simple urine test. They measure them all the time, and then we can see where things are setting. And sometimes it's helpful for the patient to see, here are the neurotransmitters, and this is how you're feeling, and this is what we can do with part of that. Functional response testing is what someone referred to as muscle testing. Muscle testing is not muscle testing. Muscle testing is a neurological phenomenon. If I had time, I would show you, if you held cortisol, if you're having trouble with cortisol, you go weak to it. That's your nervous system reacting to what it perceives, and it can perceive this from an electromagnetic or energetic standpoint, and we use that to complement these laboratory tests. And the main thing I want you to get is this individualized program. There's no one size fits all here, because everybody's different in terms of what is going on. What causes stress? How about money? How about the boss? Husband?
Men in general.
All right, there's your chance, guys. There's one. Kids. I put Obama. I should put Congress. I know, it wasn't nice. I should put Congress. I just thought about Obama. He's a nice guy. Everybody, Congress would be more appropriate in terms of what's there. But the thing is that none of these are cost. None of these are cost. What causes stress? It's what goes in between your ears. So ultimately, I'm not saying that every single aspect is easy to change your thinking about. Well, I'll let you know that if your thinking is always trapped in here in terms of what's going on, it's difficult for you to get out of that. So what I try and encourage people to do is be a little bit more present and be a little bit less in here. How many people know the lottery numbers for Saturday night? Raise your hand. But yet we'll project something into the future, and then we'll start worrying about what we just made up. And sometimes we'll ask people, if you had a friend who talked to you as much as you talk to yourself, would you hang out with their friend? And the answer is always no. Because with all the self-talk that tends to go on all the time, we tend to either go back and shoulda, coulda, woulda, or we're projecting the future about our imagination, and we get ourselves into a tizzy. So I really encourage this as part of, know that you are in control here. You get to control your thoughts. If you see that they're out of control, everybody take a nice big deep breath right now, all the way to the top of your lungs, and let it out. You just chilled out cortisol. Because when you take a deep breath and expand your lungs, you increase parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system chills you out. Sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight down here with cortisol, and it gets you all anxious. So what you do is you take a few deep breaths, and you look around. And you look at the clock. You look at the wall. What you do is you get present, and you get not stepping there. And it gets you out of your head. So I invite all of you to. So summary. Aren't you glad to see that, Michelle? You're not suffering from a medication deficiency. In fact, there's no medication that is essential to your body. Aspirin has no place, it doesn't fit any physiological aspect. You're not mental. I literally have patients cry sometimes when I tell them that. Because they have been made to think, because their symptoms don't fit into the right box and the guys can't figure it out, that they must be mental. You're not mental if you have these symptoms going on. It is indeed physiological. These symptoms all have a physiological cause. And I've worked with them for the last 35 years. Hard to imagine it's been that long. And you can find out what's going on, and it can be corrected with the correct approach. And the correct approach can also be all natural. It doesn't have to, obviously, and they're balanced with natural solutions. And when in doubt, breathe. And when you can't get tired of reading, you come see us because we fix things naturally. Thank you. I'll open up the questions.